Hello again, beautiful souls. Lori Rivers here with another episode of the Holistic Healing with Lori podcast. And today I have a great episode for you. We're going to be sharing an excerpt from my recent long COVID and ME CFS Holistic Healing Summit, which had amazing speakers. And among those were the incredible Kim Rogers and Dr. Jess Peatross. And these two women they're just incredible voices in the field of parasites, which of course is our theme for this month. So without further ado, let's dive right into it. Dr. Jess is a certified Gerson practitioner and a functional medicine leader. Her approach focuses on recovering your natural health through a comprehensive detoxification program. And this includes your lifestyle and diet modification, as well as balancing the body, mind, and spirit. So truly holistic here. And she also has this incredible website, and she offers Wellness Plus with protocols on specific illnesses. And this includes long COVID, it includes mold, and it includes parasites, and lots of other really helpful things too. And Kim Rogers is the creator of the Parafy kit and the Rogers Hood Apothecary. She actually worked in Western medicine herself for 18 plus years, holding an associate's in medical specialties and bachelor's in healthcare. And her own personal health journey led her to a different and possibly even better, opportunity in helping others and realizing how important it is to understand their own bodies and health. I always love to hear about origin stories. And I know it's really hard to put this into a nutshell. But if you could possibly, Dr. Jess, how did you become focused on functional medicine and maybe even specifically on parasites as opposed to a traditional medical path?
Yes, absolutely. So a couple things. My business partner is texting me pictures of worms right now. So it's a theme that we're on for this morning, which is great. And for me, I will say also, I trained in Gerson therapy, but I don't practice now. I find other ways. And one of them is that they don't look at is parasites. And the reason I got into that was I just started asking why until I couldn't ask why anymore. I was a hospitalist, which means I admit everything from the emergency department except acute emergencies or surgeries. And basically, I had to know something about everything. And they didn't talk about it in the hospital, unless it came up on a culture or a blood test, it was dismissed and tests were thought to have all the answers. So really, when I got out into holistic and functional medicine, I was asking why about patients' bodies. Why did they have these mystery illnesses? Why did they have insomnia or high blood pressure? And what it led me to were things like water damaged homes and Lyme disease and parasites and all of those things. And when I got into parasites, really, I started looking into them because of co-infections with Lyme disease, things like Babesia, right? Which is a 40% or so, even more, have a co-infection with Babesia. And so that's a microscopic parasite you can't see. And then that made me start to wonder if those tests are inaccurate, how about the other parasite tests? And so that kind of led me down the functional medicine route where a lot of functional chiropractors were talking about parasites and showing these parasite pictures and things like that. I think they have a whole show on Discovery or something like that called Monsters Inside Me. So there's this fascination with things like this in general. But I found it a big part of people's puzzles. And I kind of gravitate towards things where patients don't get answers, have mystery illnesses, or feel like they can't heal, because I think that the system really focuses on these people and gaslights them. And I feel a need to really do the opposite for them. Yeah.
And thank you so much for that.
Yes.
So mystery illnesses, definitely talking about long COVID and ME/CFS for sure. So Kim, could you give us your origin story in a nutshell?
It involves Dr. Jess. So it's awesome that we're all here. I just wasn't getting better. And my colleagues started to let me down colleagues isn't like doctors and my friends. So it just really was a struggle for me. I was not getting better and I was doing all the things. I had gotten off my synthetic medications. I was taking mushrooms like lion's mane, turkey tail to really boost my body. And I still just wasn't at that optimal level. And I couldn't figure out why. I was like bare bones at this point. And so I just thought a few years ago that I might have had parasites, worms in particular. They're two different things. And I just started to dig even more. And I had come across Dr. Jess a few years before with COVID and her talking about it. And then she segued it over to parasites. And I thought, oh man, is that possible? And so it all just tied together. And I just did a cleanse and I saw them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And within 3 days, I knew that 99% of my problems were from that. The other 1% ended up being mold, which is a whole nother segment, but also involving Dr. Jess very much. So it just became like really like a light bulb went off. Oh my gosh, this is what's been going on. This is the weird movement. And it's just not recognized. I didn't recognize it when I was in Western medicine. And so it just hits you at once, right? You're like, oh my gosh, wow, how many people are really suffering from this? And then I went viral on TikTok, quite viral, like 10.1 million views and like 1 million in an hour. And it was just really a lot. And I sat there and thought, first off, I don't want to be called the worm lady. So TikTok gave me a name. I got worm queen. So I'm like, at least I got that. Like, I got to have fun with this. It's a weird subject. It's gross. I did not like parasites when I was in the field. I left urgent care because of it. And here I am now. Like I made one 60-second joking video. Like I saw carcasses and then I could have sat there and not said anything else. But I decided in that moment that I would start talking more about how I felt and what was going on and just really educating people because I was a professor for 5 years and it's my jam. And then I got sick when it really took me down. So it's like you're seeing the changes. It's cool because you can watch my story and watch me physically change as well.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
amazing. So let's talk some more about what these critters are. Kim, that's basically how you came to create the Parafy kit, right?
Yeah.
Because of your own experience.
Yeah. And it's very expensive to cleanse.
Yeah.
It's very expensive. And so I couldn't afford that for my husband and me. We had him in our water. That's how it all ended up. We found that out. I got my stool tested by an independent laboratory. They're parasitologists. This is all they do. So they're constantly just looking at multiple different segments of your poop versus just what LabCorp does, which is just one segment and then moves on. If you don't see anything in 3 minutes, it's over. And that just isn't acceptable for me. So I sought out another form of testing for myself. And in the process, it came back that I had waterborne parasites. I had Cryptosporidium parvium, Jeremy had D. fragilis, and roundworm. So I'm like, those are all drinking water. Like, how is this possible? Like, we use reverse osmosis water. Like, we're very good about it. It was in the water in the well in our community. And I have a community of about 3,500 people to 4,000 that live in my area. And I did not know that it was a community. And now I know, but so I had my stool tested and then I had my water tested at the street and at where we showered. And that's how we found out that that's where we got it from. And we had been off and on at this property for about 6 years. And my symptoms really started about 5.5 years ago, like really intense symptoms. So you find the one little missing link. And
yeah, it's so interesting because I know for some people that it builds up over time. There's not a specific place where they can say, this is where I got the parasites, or this is where this started to happen for me. So that's really interesting that you can take a look back there. And since we were talking about how doctors respond or don't respond, Dr. Jess and Kim, actually, both of you, when you go to a doctor and you say, I think I might have parasites, what's a typical response that you get? Dr. Jess, let's start with you for that one.
I think that people have to be pretty brave to go to their doctor and just spout off like that, because I think they know in advance intuitively that most doctors are not going to understand, or that if even an understanding one is probably going to say, oh, really? Okay, interesting. Let's test you. And their standardized tests are very lacking, to say the least. Just as Kim was mentioning in her own personal story, the main labs that everyone has around the country are things like LabCorp and Quest. And those are blood work panels where you have someone looking under a microscope for just a small amount of time because they have a number of slides to go through throughout the day. And you're lucky if you get a positive result. And these doctors have been shown time and time again through faulty lab work, the parasites aren't prevalent. And so that's really the problem, is that the blood work and the testing, the standard testing hasn't changed in so many years. It hasn't really been upgraded. We're coming out with GPT chat and like AI everything. We can't update blood work 30 to 50 years. I don't know.
Yeah.
So this has been told to doctors that it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the most common answers that I hear to that when a typical doctor is approached is, that's not a problem in the US. That's only undeveloped countries. But and time again, I've had a student come to me and say, I just got tested for parasites or worms or whatever, the full gamut. They all came back negative. And within a couple of weeks of either changing their way of eating or treating, they are seeing the worms that they're missing. And it happens over and over again.
Absolutely. And maybe before that was the case back in the day, but our food supplies really changed a lot. And so I wouldn't say the US has the healthiest food supply.
Yeah. Yeah. And your estimation, Dr. Jess, what would you think, what percentage of people living in developed countries have parasites?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell because, again, this is a guess, an estimation, just because really the tests are so faulty. We have no way of accurately measuring this. But over the course of people's lifetimes, there's a really good chance that you're going to deal with at least one parasite and probably more than one. And I've had different people in the industry say 80 to 75 to 85% of people. And, that over the course of their lifetime, that probably is the case, honestly. And so this is a big problem, whether you go out of the country or not, because parasites don't understand borders. So
that's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. So with how many of your patients, Dr. Jess, that you serve, do you suspect have parasites as part of the root cause of a chronic illness, whether that's long COVID or ME/CFS or fibromyalgia or MS or whatever?
For sure. I think we have a pretty good estimate on Lyme disease, which is a bacteria. It's 300 to 400 million per year, and the numbers are increasing. If you see numbers of viruses, bacteria increasing, you are going to see the numbers of the parasites increasing too, because they're part of an ecosystem to clean up waste. And so if that's the case, we are going to see this increasing too, because we're more and more full of toxins as society continues. Unfortunately, that's the hard truth. And so I would say in general, if you haven't done a parasite cleanse and you have a chronic health issue, like you just mentioned, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all of those type of things, these are really heavily tied into Lyme disease and therefore parasites too, because these are co-infections with Lyme disease. And this is something I've definitely seen long COVID kick off Lyme disease. I've definitely seen parasites be involved in a positive and a negative way with long COVID. Actually, it's very interesting, and definitely have seen things like Epstein-Barr connected too. It's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that in discussions that I've had with some other people and also with my own experience, my students' experiences, is that these things can get reactivated when a big storm like COVID or another big virus comes along. And these things get reactivated like EBV or Lyme. Maybe even you weren't experiencing any Lyme symptoms before. And so it's a whole picture.
It is. I have EBV and CMV. It was reactivated by long haul, and it was at the end of a parasite cleanse at the beginning of the mole. So they're all formulated together. They really are. The wormwood suppresses a lot of the symptoms, and that kind of allows your body to start to heal a little bit. So while I was on my Parafy cleanse, things were going well. I got off of it. The suppression was happening. And then I didn't realize I was in the thick of mold as well. So that really played a huge part of it. Again, Dr. Jess, if it wasn't for Wellness Plus, I probably wouldn't have been able to really get myself out of the mold as fast as I did. But they all live in harmony in your ecosystem. They really do. They really do.
One of the things that blew my mind as I started to research this stuff more is that, just as an example, worms actually have their own little microbiome. So they carry candida, fungus, and heavy metals and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
So it gets to be a little overwhelming there. But Kim, when we're talking about parasites, what kind of critters are we referring to here?
The physical worms like pinworms, roundworm, they're all nematodes in the world. And then you have flatworm, whipworm. It depends on how you get them, right? So that's where they label them. And then they have their own species of hookworm is in your blood, which you get when you're gardening, if you're not careful. And a lot of people get it because we eat other countries' food and they cleanse, right? So that kind of changes the dynamic of it. Again, no borders here. And then tapeworm causes a lot of different things as well. So each one of them has its own. And then you have the protozoas, where that's like the parasite, where it's Cryptosporidium parvium and D. fragilis giardia. And a lot of those come from contaminated water. So you're looking at all of them come from contaminated water at some point, but especially the microscopic parasites. And that's the problem, is you don't always see them. Now, we had actual larvae in our water. Like, I saw them, but they really make you think you don't. And we were living in a travel trailer at the time. So of course I just thought, oh, I'm in a travel trailer. It's in my toilet. We're fine. So those are physical versus the microscopic ones, which is, it really is scary. But at the same time, like, we're human and everything gets something at some point, when you just have to be conscientious. That's really what it is. Be aware. And then they control you. So they're like, you're fine. You don't have worms. You don't have parasites, because they want to live. You're fine. That's really how you think.
Yeah. So that sounds so woo, but
it does. Trust me. It sounds very woo-woo.
Yes. But it's like you're taken over by aliens, really, seriously. But so again, like, not wanting to freak people out, but at the same time, recognizing that if you're having a craving for something that you know is not something that you should be having, and a part of you is saying, but it's going to make me feel better and it's going to do this, and then I'll be fine afterwards, and blah, blah, blah. That's the parasites having their little mind control. So it's pretty crazy. Pretty crazy.
They say parasites are mind controlling and mold is brainwashing. And that's the way the two work together. And since I've broken away from the parasites and the mold, because I've changed my environment and my body, I can honestly say that really is pretty close to being truthful.
Yeah. Interesting. And since we're talking about those symptoms, Dr. Jess, what are some symptoms of parasitic infection? So how do our viewers know if it's a good thing for them to look into?
There's a few that I asked for immediately right off the bat. And then there's a handful of other symptoms that can cross over with other digestive disorders or pathogenic loads in general. So the main three ones are things like, for me, things like worse around the full moons with anxiety and insomnia. Rectal itching is a really big one too. Dairy sensitivity is another one. Bruxism, which is teeth grinding, especially later at night, which, when, in my opinion, these things wake up and start wanting sugar, other cravings for processed food, and really keep you pinged around 7 p.m. and throughout the rest of the night. And then there are other things that cross over with other pathogenic loads, like I mentioned, things like autoimmunity, things like joint pains, just digestive issues in general, bloating, constipation, or loose stools, depending on what's going on and what you have. Things like even SIBO can have a parasitic component because the test will miss it, right? So even something like that. And remember, things like water damaged buildings, mold, they go in unison oftentimes with parasitic infections because they lower the immunity enough for things to jump on board and be a problem. You may also notice muscle fasciculations and soreness, chronic fatigue, histamine issues are a really big one that I see as well. And sometimes that will go in conjunction with rashes like eczema. Hives are a big one. You'll see a higher eosinophil count on the labs and maybe a lower iron or ferritin level on the labs as well. Those are some routine blood work clues, but again, they don't have to be positive to still have a parasitic problem. So those are just a few of the ones as well. Bell's palsy indicates Lyme disease for me, so that's also an indication to look for parasites.
Interesting. I'm thinking about a couple of students because I think I knew that at some point, but I'd forgotten about it. Now, as far as where these parasites live, and Kim touched on this before as well, but Dr. Jess, because when we think of parasites, we think of them living in the intestines, right? Which is certainly true, but where else do they live in the body?
Definitely not just the intestines. It really depends on where they are in their cycle, and their reproductive cycle really mirrors the moon cycles. And so that's why I asked about the full moon, is because many of them will detach and be in their reproductive cycle during that time, which can really cause us to feel irritated. So we grind our teeth at night because of the stress on the body. You may have restless legs or be itchier when that's happening. And when that happens, they can reproduce in different parts of the body. The larva can be placed in different parts of the body and have to migrate. A parasite, strongyloides, really goes all over the body, sometimes into the lymph and fascia, and then into the liver and the rest of the digestive system too. So it depends on what you're dealing with, but they definitely have free range depending on what it is.
Yeah. 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 And I know that Dr. Jess, that you've had patients who have fully recovered from these issues as well. Yeah. So we're going to get there. Why don't we go now to Kim? Now, you talked about some of the things to look out for in your water and things like that, but how else do we get these parasitic infections?
Pets. Yep. Yeah. It's so sad, right? We deworm our dogs, but then they lay with us and they hang out with us. And don't get rid of your pets, just cleanse. There's ways to deal with all of these things. Going in a lake, raw produce, that is one thing that I have found to be very difficult for me because I love salad and I no longer eat raw produce when I'm out because I just don't know how. I know, it's so sad.
I know, I'm like, maybe I shouldn't do that because salads they feel like a safe first go-to when you're out. But are we fooling ourselves?
Yes. It's so sad. It is. It's so sad because they just don't clean the produce like you do at home. They're not ozonating it and they're not soaking it. And I've talked to a lot of chefs because I just did not want to give up my produce when I'm out. I love salads. It's like my go-to. And so I don't eat any raw produce when I'm out. And if I do, by mistake, I had a tomato and mozzarella cheese plate. And I'm like, I started eating the tomatoes and I'm all, this is raw. So I came home and I took some Parafy for a few days. Seafood is a big one. I don't eat salmon anymore, which is a bummer for me because I love salmon. But we live on a private lake and I know crypto's very huge here now because I got it. And so I don't go in the lake, going in rivers, but if you do, you just have to be conscientious. That's all it is now. It's just knowing. And then I know what my symptoms would be if I had a parasitic infection. So I'm just really conscientious. But for most people, that's really what it is. Produce, pets, going in the lake, gardening, but you don't want to stop living.
Yeah. And I'm really appreciative that you said that you don't want to stop living. So like you said, there are these precautions that you can take. And when we look at other countries and places where people are more conscious about parasitic infections, they regularly either take meds or do a cleanse at least twice a year. And that's just,
and they're like,
given
$7. It's $7 to go to their pharmacy and walk in. And you just say, I need this. Because we were in the Caribbean and we got some antiparasitics and it was $7. And I'm just like, that's just nuts to me that I can just take this, no worries, and I'm done. And I won't feel, the way we all have been feeling.
And that wraps up our segment for today. Now, if you want to hear the whole thing, which I highly recommend, and to delve deeper into long COVID and ME/CFS and the Holistic Healing Summit with 35 plus other experts, you can head over to longcovidsummit.com or mecfssummit.com. And there you're going to find not only the full interview, but also a plethora of other resources to assist you on your healing journey. And as always, please, if you found value in this episode, share it with someone who might benefit from it. Really want to spread the word of hope and help as well. And please remember that your journey to healing is a journey to self-discovery as well. I know that sounds cheesy, but it really is. Everybody that I've talked to who has fully recovered has said that they learned so much about themselves, which is really helpful. So keep shining your light, and I will see you in the next episode.